we live?
Wait, before you go live.
Nope, we're live.
Hey, everybody, get out of here. Hey, hi, it's Mike MacLean. I'm here for the panel La Muerta 2020 and beyond, and I'm here with our illustrious artist of the interiors, Joel Gomez. Everybody, Joel.
Hey guys, how's everyone doing?
So, Joel, just maybe to let people know who might not know some of your work, tell me a little bit about some of the work that you've done before La Muerta.
Before La Muerta, let's see. Kind of got my start as a background artist, helping guys out at Top Cow Productions. It wasn't really an official title. It was more of just kind of hung out and got to know the artists, and I learned a lot through that experience, and got to work with Mark Silvestri and Mike Turner as well. And from there, it kind of led me doing the same kind of background assist work over at Coffin Comics. And at the time, I was helping Mike Turner out on an issue or two of, I think it was Soulfire at the time, was one of the big books he was working on. And that led to another project, which I worked with Francis Manipul on, which was called, at that time, it was called Iron in the Maiden. But due to some legality issues, they had to change the name to Iron Saint. And that book was created by Crash Bandicoot and Jack and Daxter game developer who created this new comic book. His name was Jason Rubin. And he was more of like a high-profile guy, and he had a lot of interest in the project. So he was shopping it around. We shopped it at the time at Wildstorm, and Jim Lee caught an eye on it and saw the work and asked me if I'd wanted to come and join Wildstorm. So I ended up working there from 07, maybe 08, till they disbanded the studio in 2010. Bounced around doing a couple little freelance gigs here and there. Did some DC Comics licensing stuff. And then that's when I met Brian PULIDO at the Phoenix Fan Expo, I think. I can't remember the name, but it was held at the stadium that the Cardinals would play in. So it was the first time they had a convention in there, and that's when I met Brian. Oddly enough, it was he offered me La Muerta, and at the time our schedules didn't work out for when he needed to get it done, and so we kind of parted ways, and I didn't hear back from him for a couple months later, and I guess the current guy they had been working with just didn't work out like they had planned, and everybody was happy to just kind of part amicably, and so he offered me the opportunity to jump on board again. And at that time, Brian and Mike had put together a really cool like pitch book of the whole property, and so without even starting a single page, I kind of got a real strong idea of what the character was about and what they were going for with the look of it all, and it was easy to get hooked to the premise, and the concept and the character looked really badass. So, I mean, yeah, I was all on board.
Yeah, I remember those times. By the way, for those of you that don't know, my name is Mike MacLean. I'm the co-writer of La Muerta with Brian. And my background before working in comic books with Brian, I actually co-write all of Coffin's stuff right now. And my background was more in screenwriting. And I will tell you, just as a little background information, we had written La Muerta as a screenplay first, and it felt like a race against time. Once we decided to make a comic book out of it, it felt like a race against time because we knew it was something that was kind of prevalent in the culture. The sugar skull face, it was something that you were beginning to see more and more. So we were really racing to find the right artist, but Brian just kept holding off because he was looking for the right person. You won't believe how many people he looked through. But luckily, we found Joel, who was definitely the right person for La Muerta. Anybody that reads it knows it's hard to even think of the comic book without Joel's work on that. So, with that in mind, let me give you just a quick rundown. For those of you that might be uninitiated to the character, La Muerta follows the story of Maria Diaz, who is an veteran, a U.S. Army veteran out of Afghanistan, who comes home, unfortunately, to find her family threatened and then later slaughtered by a very vicious cartel run by the infamous Mama Z. And so, left for dead, she then rises from the ashes and takes the guise of La Muerta, this sugar skull faced, calavera faced vigilante, and obviously to seek vengeance. And that was in the very first couple of chapters of La Muerta. That brings us to now. Joel, just give us an idea, like compared to your other work, how does La Muerta compare? Working on La Muerta, how does that compare to work that you've done in the past?
You know what? I think it was like a transition from when I got into comics originally. I had a fascination and love for the basic characters I started out with. You know, well, the mostly Marvel, DC kind of characters. I really enjoyed the concepts and the characters and the designs. And but as I got older, like I found that I would read fewer and fewer of these books. I still had a love and fascination for the characters themselves, but like they just didn't really kind of like have stories that hit me as they did as I was younger. And so far, working on La Muerta with you guys has been different because it's, I don't know, maybe it's tailored for me as an audience in the sense that it's a new concept, it's a new premise, but it's also something that's not necessarily like for an older audience. It's just that it's written in a way that's a little bit more of a mature reader kind of thing, and I enjoy that. I enjoy the idea and the prospect of creating comics that that are for someone like me who is still reading them and got in starting to read Marvel and DC books, which are fantastic. But if you still enjoy the premise of comics, you're always kind of looking for new stories, and a lot of times I would scratch that itch with graphic novels or books that kind of had an open and shut story. It's not so much a licensed property that's perpetually going on and on. And in a lot of ways, I think that the concepts and some of the stories we touch on with Muerta, there's some finite kind of things happening where there's a beginning, middle, and end to certain things, and there's change that happens within the characters that I'm excited to see happen and be a part of to make happen. Because there's nothing wrong with the Marvel and DC books, but I'm just a person looking for new material that is kind of more age appropriate, I guess. And I love the medium. I mean, comics as a form of entertainment and storytelling is like, it's fascinating to me because it just gives you so many ways to interpret something, and you kind of have a limitless budget. I mean, you have time working against you, but I mean, it's all a matter of what you and the writing team and the colorists can put together to create a sense of mood and atmosphere and kind of like the ups and downs that a character can go through. So to me, I guess it just happened at the right time in that it hit me at a time when I really wanted to find something new to really kind of aspire to, and it was challenging, and it still is challenging in some ways, finding ways to get people on board and enjoy this new property. So I get a kick out of that, and I enjoy being able to do that with you and Brian.
Yeah, it's really exciting also to work on a character and of a culture that's so underrepresented in the comic book world and in media in general. She's very unique in that way. So it's exciting to work on something that's just it feels different. It feels different than you might be used to when you pick up your regular comic book. And it's
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So, how does it feel for you to change hats, so to speak, from some sort of fantasy element to this kind of crime noir urban setting?
Well, like as I mentioned, my background is screenwriting, but even before that, I started writing short fiction, and most of the short fiction I wrote was in the crime and noir genre. So La Muerta, of the comics I write for Coffin, La Muerta by no means is the easiest, but is the one that I am most comfortable in. It's the one that feels most close to my skin. So long time fan of noir and hard-boiled and any of those kind of genres in crime fiction, and of course crime fiction comics. Sin City is probably my favorite, one of my favorite comics of all time.
Oh yeah,
which is a huge inspiration, I think, for us in La Muerta.
Heck yeah.
So for to step away from science fiction, I might be better known for science fiction because of some of the movies that I wrote. But really, like my heart is right there in the crime fiction, and that's kind of where I got my start in writing. where I was first published.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So
do you find anything that you pull from in life to bring into the La Muerta stories that you say, okay, this is an interesting angle to tap into. I want to kind of pour this in.
Well, I mean, that's a really good question, and it's not necessarily an easy one to answer because I think that you're constantly bombarded by your influences. I have lived
Right.
my entire life here in Arizona, a border state, so the characters don't feel too alien to me. You know what I mean? There's a familiarity, and that's kind of one of the things that drew me to crime fiction. I think when I was into science fiction, the fascination is always the alien cultures and the things that are the others. But with crime fiction, there are people living in this kind of underworld that's right next to us. It's alive and there.
Yeah.
You've gone to a restaurant and whether you knew it or not, or a bar, you were sitting next to one of these guys. And that fascinates me, that there's this whole underworld society that we are right next to. And I find that, much more interesting than like learning about some alien culture, because it's there in real life. So to answer your question, yeah, I think we all draw from our experiences. I can't think of one in particular that drew me to crime fiction necessarily, but yeah, I mean, just growing up in Tempe, Arizona, going to Catholic school, you can't get away from the Mexican American influences here in Arizona. So, yeah. So just without further ado, let me look really quick. Let's go into what's kind of coming up with Chapter 6. Now, Chapter 6 of La Muerta is now titled Retaliation, and the Kickstarter will be kicking off in May. We haven't settled on a particular date in May yet, but sometime in May, maybe the 13th, maybe the 20th. And just give just a general idea of what Chapter 6 is going to be about. I have Forbidden Witchcraft has brought Mama Z back from the depths of hell. Now, the ruthless cartel boss has only one unyielding desire: to see the avenging vigilante known as La Muerta completely destroyed. Hunted by bloodthirsty psychos and corrupt cops, La Muerta must wage a savage war for survival, all leading to one of the most brutally violent, bullet-written climaxes ever. Do you think that's a fair description, especially of the climax, Joel?
Oh, geez, that's putting it mildly.
Yeah. So when you were, well, let me ask a general question about drawing La Muerta overall. How has your approach to La Muerta changed from the beginning to now, going into, we finished Chapter 6. How has your approach to drawing the character and the backgrounds and everything, how has that changed over the time?
It's funny. It's actually it's gained more like volume and more momentum as we move forward. So I mean, geez, even from Chapter 1, like I didn't really know you or Brian all that well, and it was like a fun gig to work on at the time, and I was still learning my way through the character. There were times where I go back and forth with Brian regarding the look of certain things. This doesn't look right. This feels a little rough, and so we kind of work things out. And when I was asked back for Chapter 2, I was excited, and I started to kind of get more involved with some of the characters. I was drawing enough of certain characters in a way where I was like, hey, I'm really getting a hang of what this character's personality is about, or their look has a more consistent kind of style to it. And also I started understanding the scripts a little bit more clearly. Not that they weren't clear, but I got a better sense of what you and Brian were going for, what you were about. And so it made me more able to understand, like, okay, they want like a really big shot here with a really kick-ass sequence on this side, and then so I started to see and pick my moments where I thought, like, I can really go off here, and then there's other areas where I would kind of build up the momentum to that sequence or that big splash image. And every time I look back at a previous chapter, I started seeing places in the script or in the sequence where I was like, oh man, I missed my opportunity. I could have really like nailed this scene or this particular sequence. And the way you guys were writing, or still are writing it, it almost feels like a movie at all times to me. So it's very easy to visually like think of the shots in a lighting style that is something prime noir, something out of Sin City. And like I said, the scripts read that way, so it made it easier for me to really kind of digest it and kind of interpret it in that way. Whereas in the beginning, not so much. I was still feeling my way through a lot of it. And but once you had that familiarity with the scenes and the characters, and once I got a better understanding of what you guys were enjoying more of, I would keep that in my toolbox, and then I'd add some other new tool later on down the line and see how that worked out. And sometimes it would go really well, and very rarely it wouldn't go so well. So then I would toss that out, and it's just like this. The synchronicity that I've never had really. I've worked at, like I said, I worked at Top Cow, I worked at Aspen, and I worked at Wildstorm for a while, and they were all amazing opportunities. But at the end of the day, like there's no substitute for being able to have that kind of connection with the other parts of the team, because then you guys are all in unison and it's almost like a band. And that's the most rewarding aspect about the process to me, is that like sink or swim, hell or high water, it's the 4 or 5 of us, whoever are on the team, it's all of us putting together this concept, this comic, and this form of entertainment. And as people enjoy it and respond to it, it gives you a sense of like, oh, that's really cool. We accomplished this thing together, but it also shows the strength we have as a unit. And I really get a kick out of that, because it's like, it's so rewarding to know like, hey, we put all our minds together and our thoughts and ideas and working out these concepts. And it's, in a lot of ways, it's a lot of how TV shows and movies are made. It's like it's a joint process, and individuality is great, but it's more about the end product that we come up with as a team. Because a lot of times a script isn't necessarily how it's going to end up looking or reading, because there's going to be actors involved, or a director, or it's going to be lighting, or there's going to be effects. And so all of these things in unison create the final kind of product. And to me, what we do with La Muerta at Coffin is, it's awesome. And again, the opportunity to do it at the number of years that we've been doing it, it's just it just kind of it has us stacking success on the things we really want to share with readers. So I enjoy that process immensely.
Yeah, I would kind of double down on that. Having worked a little bit in low budget film, I know that like when I finish a script and hand it in, they're pretty much done with me. So the idea that the synchronicity and the teamwork, it really feels like we're all working together to make a product. And with a film, even though it's very collaborative and I love doing it, you're kind of done when you're done with that part of it. With the comics, there's still some back and forth, and I will tell you, the imagery in the comics, you and the other artists, but definitely your work, it always looks better than I imagined in my head. Sometimes in a movie, I don't picture it this way, or I don't picture it that way. But when I see Joel's work or Diego's work, it always comes across better than I could imagine. I think that's the artist's job, right? I certainly can't. I can barely draw a stick figure, so it's amazing.
I'm lucky to have that compliment. So I have a quick question for you, Mike.
Sure.
So knowing you work with a diversity of artists, do you find that the way you write or describe things has to be adjusted based on who's on your team? Like, for example, is there a way that you would go about explaining or describing a scene or sequence to me versus like towards, let's say, Bernard's strengths, where Diego Bernard, where you would say like, oh, I think I need to describe it in this other way because I know what his strengths are.
I think there's a little bit of that. There's obviously, the scripts we send to Diego Bernard, I believe, are translated for him. So I try to
Oh,
keep
wow.
so I try to keep the language relatively simple while still trying to evoke emotion and make them enthusiastic so the person who's drawing it can get excited about what they're drawing. I find like the very
Right.
robotic scripts, I don't know how, if you've come across those, I don't understand how the artist can get excited about something that's very robotic and plain. So obviously, yeah, I have to take that in consideration. I worked with a couple of artists whose first language wasn't English, so you have to write in a little bit of simpler style where I can be a little more nuanced, obviously, with you. And I think that comes across. And
Right.
as far as the strengths, I mean, you are so dialed into La Muerta. It's hard to picture her being drawn by anybody else. It's so you're very strong in catching the mood, which I think is probably the hardest part. You can draw the character. Obviously, there's lots of great artists out there that can do a beautiful rendition of the character, but catching the mood of the story, you've got that dialed in so well. So
Ah, thanks, man. She's like a little sister now.
yeah, feels you're rooting for her. You almost feel bad doing the having her go through these horrible events. And like, oh, but that's
I
our
put her
job.
through the ringer.
Yeah, that's our job though. We gotta put her through the ringer. So speaking of chapter 6, I understand you have a little bit of artwork to show us from that chapter. Maybe a little teaser that we can get to.
Yeah.
Maybe as you show it, just
Yeah,
kind of.
show. Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, as you show it, maybe give us a little description, or maybe some background, or maybe a challenge or two that you faced with drawing those.
All right. So this first one that we have here, it's right after a little sequence with Mama Z, and we're kind of back at her crazy lair, and she's talking to a senator, and so just thought I'd show you an image of that. So yeah, as you can see, she has a very nice place that she lives in. But she's also got a little bit of a boo-boo on her torso area.
Yeah. So for those who have been reading along from the beginning, we know Mama Z is supposed to be dead, and if you've read the last chapter, Napalm Nick going through. If you've read the last chapter, you know that she has been brought back from the dead through dark means. What was your inspiration for the big hair in that one? It was a very nice surprise when you had that idea.
It's like I had this idea that Mama Z to me is a cross between this character that was in a Ridley Scott movie about drug dealers. I keep forgetting the name of it, but that and like a female pop star. And so every time I thought of Mama Z, I just imagined that she would always have like this really flamboyant, theatrical almost appearance, and it would change every time we saw her. Just because she had that type of personality and being a drug dealer, or I'm sorry, being part of a drug cartel, I just imagined that she had an era for the flamboyant kind of stuff. And so any opportunity to kind of change it up, with that one, I just decided to give her kind of like a beehive kind of hairstyle, just to really draw attention to her. And later in the sequence, or I'm sorry, later in the story, she has a much different look then. And so it's just something it gives us the opportunity to just play around with her looks a lot more, because just like in life, people don't always wear the same thing. I mean, you could be goth and have like 3 different types of black shirts, but you're not always going to wear the same thing all the time. And so with the world of La Muerta and the main characters, even La Muerta herself, it's like I try to vary up the looks, but keep a theme within it, so that gives us a lot more to play around with. And maybe if something doesn't work out as well, we don't see her again in it. But it's nice. The variety and the look is something that we get to play with in comics, because again, there's no budget, and as long as thematically it fits with the character, I can't imagine why people wouldn't be interested in seeing them in different looks. It's like Birds of Prey, the recent movie. They had Harley Quinn, and her looks constantly changed, and that's just part of the unique thing that we could take advantage of with this kind of story. And so with Mama Z specifically, I try to go out of the way, or I try to go out of my way to give it really a flamboyant theatrical style. You know?
Yeah, it definitely works. How about another one?
Yeah, let me see. We got one here. This one is this is a little bit later in the action sequence, and you can actually see Mama Z in a different look at one of these panels. But this one, it starts getting pretty heavy duty. Yeah, and you can see there's a little bit more action going on. Little panel there with Mama Z in a more kind of like a tribal Aztec Mayan kind of getup. Right there.
And this is part of the climax that we were talking about that is just riddled with bullets. That was
And violence.
and violence. 90s style action movie violence. So we got a couple comments.
Yeah, that's the thing that we get to really play up with the story.
Yeah.
Kind of play up the drama and the violence, like you say, very 90s style, but also kind of B-movie, you know, different.
So I got a couple comments. We got Stickman says, "In death she lives." Comic Crypt of Castle is sworn. Fernando Valencia says, "Love La Muerta, favorite new character in the past 10 years." Wow, thank you.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank
you.
Richard Friend says, "Hi, Joel," and winks at you. Okay, I don't know what that's about, but all right.
Oh, shit, Richard Friend. Richard Friend was a studio mate of mine at Wildstorm.
And then
everybody, I'm sure, knows Richard Friend's work with Travis on Wildcats. Big fan of that run. Those guys were killing it at that time.
Yeah.
Rich Friend worked with Will Spartacio, Jim Lee, worked with all the legends.
And he laughs and says, "Joel rules."
Ha! Yeah. Actually, I think he's working on a new comic too. I think he's working on some sort of Iron Maiden maybe related comic.
I don't know. Maybe he'll have to key in, but.
Here's another page, though.
He says,
check this out.
Yeah, check out another page.
This one was actually inspired by Mike. He had this really cool idea for this shot. We have La Muerta in peril here by a really evil goon guy, but Mike had the idea for the shot he saw somewhere else, and it's just so dramatic. I had to use it. I was inspired by it.
Yeah, it was from Joe Kubert. Very, it wasn't Sergeant Rock, but it was very Sergeant Rock-esque.
It's like GI Commando or GI's. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, some action in World War I, and then I love we might be giving away a little bit there, but that's all right. We're okay doing a little.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, here I got one more. Let me show you this other one. This is more of a splash page.
Oh, awesome.
We got La
Yeah, and you know what? This one I haven't even seen yet. I don't think I've even seen this one.
Okay.
Either.
Maybe.
Yeah, she's coming into the scene. Got a big explosion behind her. She's got a bazooka.
Just tossing that away.
Yeah. And it's amazing with what you guys do. I mean, the way these things are structured schedule-wise, it's like this book has been done for almost 8 months, maybe. I'm not sure. It's been a while. And we're already like kind of planning bigger and better things for Chapter 7, so I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, Chapter 7. Why don't we?
You guys want to see a double?
Oh yeah, let's do that first. Definitely.
Here we go. This is a really cool action shot with Maria not painted as La Muerta, but she's still being a badass.
Yeah, love the flying sidekick there.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually probably drew this double page 3 times.
Really?
Yeah, I think the leg was weird at one point. I had to redraw it.
Now, do you use any sort of like what do you use as a model? Do you try to find pictures, or do you have like a sculptor's model, or what do you use in order? Like you said, the leg was weird. How do you?
Sometimes it's pictures. It'll be reference photos, me, or sometimes I use my wife Beth who poses and stuff.
So she was jumping up and kicking?
With that one, I had a general idea of what I was going for, but then I started looking up photo rep to kind of, because it's really big. So what I do is I'm super old school and analog. I don't draw anything digitally. So I would basically I drew that double page spread on like a 8.5 by 11 piece of typing paper. I figured out the proportions and whatnot, and then I blew that up and traced my own drawing, just because at that size it can be unwieldy to try and get the proportions right, and it's like you're starting to draw with your shoulder instead of with your hand and your fist at that size, and so at that point it's less easy to be as I guess honed in on it, and you can kind of lose the forms, you know.
I don't think people think of the physical demands of being an artist as much. So that's really interesting, and it can take a physical toll, I would assume, leaning over that board and drawing for those long stretches.
So I'm curious. I gotta ask you this because I love how you write this story, but I'm curious. Like, have you seen things in the book after you've written them and you go, oh, okay, that isn't exactly what I was imagining, but next time I'll write it in a way where that's a little clear.
To be honest, I can't really think of anything. I think early on in the first couple books, and we condensed the whole screenplay into two double-sized comics. So, you know, and to no fault of yours, you had to put, you know, 4 or 5 panels that should have been probably bigger. I think we even had this conversation early on where, you know, you thought, wow, I really wish I could have worked those out. And that was just because the story, we had to condense it so much. That was the only time, but that was of no fault of yours. It was just we had to condense so much story into so few pages. But no, like I mentioned before, I've always been pleasantly surprised, not surprised, but it always looks better than what I picture in my head. And I think that's a testament to your work on La Muerta. Yeah, always looks better.
Thanks, man. I think for me, the more I get out of you and Brian and the sense of your tastes and what you like as far as in the story and everything, it gives me a better impression of where to take things or push things, because then I'm always going to try something different. But if I already have an idea of my teammates, what they're into, what they had in mind, it allows me to kind of explore in a direction that I may not be too familiar with, but because as I have that about you, I can say, hey, what if I go this way, or if I push it in this extreme, you know, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, yeah, let's do that. So it allows me to explore in a big sense. Just recently for chapter 7, which I mean, I won't really divulge much, but you sent me down the rabbit hole for this documentary that we were discussing.
Oh yeah.
And it, like, watching that gave me so much knowledge, you know.
Yeah, I believe Narco Cultura is the name of it. A documentary about about the I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation. The Nocoritos. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Narco.
Yeah. It's a fascinating documentary. I'm not sure where it's streaming, but yeah, if you get a chance, check that one out. It's really fascinating. Look into the culture and music of the cartels, of Mexican gang cartels, and the effect those have past the broader influence. You know, I'm a high school teacher, and
it was interesting.
I was just saying, I'm a high school teacher. I don't talk too much about my students. I try to keep their privacy, but I remember one of them saying like El Chapo was a big inspiration to her, and that really kind of just that's what I said, and just that mentality. I didn't know where that came from. So it's interesting to see other people's viewpoints. And to be surprised by that.
I just thought it was neat because you introduced me to this idea that how these drug cartels are using music to create this lore about them. Mm-hmm. And of course, my ass was just thinking, like, how can we infuse that into La Muerta? That's so current and relevant to this culture, and that could fit right into this book. So I wouldn't have ever thought of looking at that kind of angle. to take with the concept. You know?
Yeah, and the interesting, we were talking a little bit about the underground aspect of crime in culture and how it's next to you. These songs, if you are a gringo like me and you don't speak Spanish, you would never know what they're talking about because they're very kind of happy and peppy and dancing, and meanwhile they're talking about beheading and killing and people are dancing to them like they're having a good time. So it's a really interesting aspect of the culture that we're going to hopefully look into for future issues of La Muerta.
I love it, man.
Well, speaking about future issues, just to let you know, we've kind of gone a new way with La Muerta on the upcoming issues after Chapter 6. And Joel is going to take a bigger hand in the actual storytelling, along with myself, of La Muerta. So we are actually pushing stories back and forth, and we'll talk a little bit about Chapter 7. We can't get too deep into it. But Joel, how has that experience been for you? Being involved in the storytelling
It's
aspect.
been awesome. I think for me, the biggest takeaway is, again, just immersing myself more into the stuff that you and Brian do and how you guys may develop scripts for the Coffin Universe. And I think with everything that seems to be going on with Coffin Comics in general, there's just seems to be like a cohesiveness happening. And it's just an exciting time to be on board with you guys because I've worked on La Muerta for maybe 5+ years, I think. And so I feel like I've got a pretty decent understanding of the alleyways and side streets to this city that Maria and La Muerta reside in. And it's kind of neat to kind of take the plunge and further it along and kind of help you guys, and specifically you, develop ideas and concepts for this book, but also kind of infuse it with a little bit more of the kind of look that I'm going for, or run things by you so that we can set up really cool sequences and just kind of bring different things to the story. And it's just exciting. I get to learn a lot of really cool stuff from you and Brian, and I just add a little bit more of the Maria to my plate, and it seems like I'll be having a lot more La Muerta in my future.
Yeah, just to give you a little hint, Joel and I have already been shooting a storyline back and forth for Chapter 7, and Joel has really done an outstanding job and his ideas have come through as like he's an old pro at this. I'm a little worried he's going to take my job, but yeah, he's done a great job at helping us out with the storylines, and I think he's had a lot of fun with the plotting, if I'm not mistaken, working out how to plot it. So speaking a little bit about Chapter 7, and Brian has alluded to this in the other comics, La Muerta will be involved with the crossover, and we have the Coffin verse, but there's going to be something that's kind of the Infinity verse. So La Muerta will have involvement in that crossover event. So you can expect for Chapter 7, definitely going to be a La Muerta story, very grounded in her world, but it will intersect with the broader storyline. And not to give too much away, but some of our influences are, what did we say?
Attack the Block?
Attack the Block, Assault on Precinct 13th. Those are a couple of just to maybe give you a hint at where it's going. But yeah,
Three Amigos.
Three Amigos, lots of heavy references to Three Amigos. Let me check in. Maybe talk a little bit more about I don't know, about your involvement in the storytelling process. What's been the biggest challenge in that regard? Whether it's storytelling in terms of writing the actual story or thinking of the storytelling process as you as an artist. What's a big challenge that faces you? What's the most challenging part about drawing La Muerta?
I think now more than ever, it's like my brain and my understanding of the character, as I mentioned earlier, it's sometimes she almost feels like a family member, like a little sister, but now it's become more of like I want to express the nuanced or subtle, things going on with Maria, the character that is La Muerta, and And to do that, it pushes me as an artist because like I feel like I know her a little bit more intimately as far as like what she's about, what she's doing, what she's not doing, and now it feels like it's something I really want to get across into these stories where I want people to understand she's flawed and she has problems and she has issues just like the rest of us. But on top of that, she still has to be La Muerta and she's still like a vessel of justice through the spirit of Santa Muerte. And I want to express or show how she's struggling to juggle all of these things. Um, we still haven't really seen her fully express the things that have happened to her since the beginning of her story. I mean, she literally saw her family get slaughtered, and since then she's been on the run. And there hasn't really been any time for her to really absorb all of that and process how that affects her as a person and how she deals with that moving forward. And so what's funny and ironic is that that's the things that I'm thinking about when I think of her now from chapter 7 on. I'm thinking about these things that would make her more able to connect with people and to get an idea of like, well, hey, she's just a flawed person like me, or she's dealing with all kinds of shit like anybody else. And on top of that, she's this power of vengeance, you know? And so I think the irony comes in that I'm not thinking of these crazy action sequences or like these really explosive shots or anything like that. I'm just thinking about what would it be like to be her, or what would it be like to have to be around her and have these feelings all the time. And it's like sometimes maybe she's not the nicest person to be around. Maybe she's a loner. Maybe she doesn't want to get involved. And by doing that, she kind of maybe she alienates people. Maybe it's something she has to grapple with. And so these are things that I'd like to kind of address or play around with, just because it's like a lot of the older characters that we grew up with, you know, Peter Parker, Bruce Wayne, all these characters that carry something with them through all of the experiences as a hero. And so I enjoy that aspect of the story. And so with Muerta, I feel like we can really infuse some of that in there and still add value to what the character's about and see an actual change come from within. And it's only a human. It's only human to have that. I mean, we don't feel the same way we do about a lot of things that we did 5 years ago, and so change is part of our humanity, and how we deal with it is also an important part of that. And so I think there's so many great opportunities with this character for us to kind of explore that and then do all that other crazy insane shit like explosions and battles that those things come easy, and for me anyway, because it's just a visual aspect of it. But to really truly get this character to emote or give the reader something to latch on to while we take these roller coaster rides of adventure and excitement is really the goal for me. And to do that in synchronicity with you and Brian, that would be the ultimate. I'm really excited about all the possibilities that we have to it.
All right, great. Yeah, you know, I second that in finding that the act balancing the emotional story and emotional conflict with the actual physical conflict. I mean, we're all buying the comic to get those great action scenes, but the emotional conflict has to come through, and that balance is always a challenge. Well, I think we have about another minute or so. Maybe we can have time for maybe one or two questions, or are we cutting off pretty soon? Let's see. Do we have any questions on the board? Somebody was asking. Somebody named Beth was throwing the horns up. I don't know who that was.
Yeah, Fernando's saying he love Muerta, favorite new character in the past 10 years.
Yeah, we got to those ones earlier.
Awesome.
Maybe we'll ask just a few ones.
Yeah, we could. Looks like no, they're just sending a lot of love
So
and praise.
I got one for you, Mike.
Sure.
So, what are you excited about for La Muerta moving forward in these chapter 7 and moving forward after that? What do you see that we could possibly explore that we haven't touched on yet?
I am really excited about the story idea we have coming up the next one. It is a little bit of a departure from our usual storyline. We get a little bit more into the supernatural, but I think we've come up with an idea that melds that really well with still having the hard-boiled action feel of those 90s movies. So I'm really looking forward to working on that and blending that in. And then beyond, just telling more hard-boiled La Muerta stories. I'd love to see what she would do in Mexico. I'd love to see the extension of the Santa Muerta legends being brought into the comic, and I can't wait to get to those.
Got a question here.
Let's explore. Really excited.
How is La Muerta drawn on her army experience, and will we see more of that in the future?
The answer to that question is a definite yes. I think, especially early on in the comic, we saw a little bit more of that, establishing the character. What we haven't necessarily revealed is that she was part of the Special Forces unit. If you've done any research on the war in Afghanistan, they actually took women from regular units and they attached them to Special Forces units because Afghani women would not speak to male soldiers. So you had these women from other units being brought in and actually deployed in the field with Special Forces units. And that's what happened with La Muerta. We will definitely see in the future, not how we've kind of alluded to something in the very first couple of La Muertas, a very traumatic experience that she deals with. And we're going to see a little bit more of that experience and the causes of her trauma.
Yeah, can't wait.
All right. So I think with that, we're gonna say thank you very much for tuning in. Tune in more for other editions of the panels here at Coffin Comic Con, and let's leave it with a sworn.
Whoa!